There's a lot you can learn by looking at these maps ahead of time. And my approach to out-of-state hunts is all about efficiency, because I never have like 2 weeks in one spot. I'm going to this thing on my own, trying to figure it out. So I need to be really efficient with my energy, with my time, and every choice I make has to be, as well thought through as possible. So it starts at home with that Escouting, and basically what I'm trying to do there is get a best guess on the major pieces of the puzzle.
All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 200. Unbelievable. Got Eric Barber to my right. Eric, you've been kind of like a common fixture around here as of late, which is perfect because we're going to talk about whitetails today and specifically hunting for opportunity. Now, to help us do this, we've got a person who has probably interviewed more people than anybody else on this earth about how to kill these cagey things. We got Mark Kenyon from the Wired Hun Podcast, a big part of the Meat Eater crew. Mark, welcome. Welcome to episode 200.
Man, thank you. What an honor. I had no idea that I was going to be here for a momentous occasion like this. So now there's a whole new level of pressure on me. I sure hope I can produce.
The pressure is equally on us at this point as well. We can't mess this one up.
No. It'll be fine. Yeah. Eric. But Mark, so, we're talking about, kind of hunting for opportunity, probably specifically whitetails here, kind of broadening a person's spectrum of, the types of hunts they go on. Maybe they've hunted their home state a lot and they're looking for some inspiration or some advice or direction on hunting out-of-state hunts and just kind of how that might shift their mindset a little bit. And I'm gonna take us away from whitetails for a minute here, because speaking of broadening spectrums, Mark, it seems I've been on the Instagram machine a little bit lately, and it seems like you've traded tines and trail cams for tight loops, tippet, tiny flies, and trout. So what's going on there real quick?
That's true. Everything needs to have like an equal and opposite reaction, right? So my obsession with whitetails has to be counterbalanced by something. And the healthiest alternative I've found for part of my year is fly fishing. So, I've dove really deep into that, and I've really fallen in love with chasing trout on the fly.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
And you've been doing that. You've kind of been on like a summer deer hiatus a little bit. I'm sure it's never fully leaving your mind. In fact, I know that for a fact.
Definitely.
But you've been kind of just traveling around the West and ripping the lips off trout then?
Yeah, well, we used to rent a house out west, out by the Tetons, and then for a couple of years we lived out of a camper doing that for months at a time. And then after we had child number 2, we decided that wasn't possible anymore. So we bought a little cabin. So for the last 2 years, we've got a cabin out there. We've been spending part of the year. So I was just out there for the last 3 months. Just nice to kind of step away from things a little bit, the usual. Like you said, whitetails are on my brain every day of the year. Every day I'm either talking about them or writing about them or posting about them or paying for them. But it is kind of nice to have another thing that I can step into that I don't have work attached to, that I can just kind of, let, as you guys know, there's certain pressures and just stuff you're always thinking about if it's work related. If it's not work related, you can just fully let go of stuff.
Yep.
So that's been nice. And it kind of presses similar buttons though as deer hunting for me. It's very strategic. It's very analytical. You go to beautiful places. You get to spend quiet time in those places, just kind of connected with, the water and the landscape around you. So like many of the same things I love about deer hunting, I get to do with trout, except for instead of shooting 1 or 2 deer a year, I get to catch like hundreds of trout a year, which is
perfect.
That's awesome. Have you found at all, just kind of stepping away a little bit in some capacity, but have you had any clarity as it goes towards your whitetail strategy, or even like epiphanies that you almost think you may not have had if you didn't take that step away? I don't know. I know for me, sometimes my biggest or most important thoughts as it pertains to my passion, happen whatever, in the shower or on my drive to work, or when I'm doing something else. You're like, oh man, I didn't think about it that way.
Yep.
Yeah, I can't point to a single specific strategic epiphany or anything, but 2,000% having that opportunity to kind of step away totally refuels me and like fills my tank. So, I think if I didn't do anything but whitetails, which I certainly could, and for many years I did, that was what all it was. That's a great way to go. And I mean, it's awesome. And you certainly can spend every day of the year in this kind of thing, because whitetails and the culture and the schedule around it it's never ending. But I did find that, especially, and it's a little bit unique for us as we work in this world, you can see your tank starting to drain a little bit. And I never want my tank to drain too far on this thing that I'm so passionate about and that I love so much. So having that other place to go and just, like I said, kind of immerse yourself, it's like stopping at the gas station and fueling up with nitro. And so when I step away from that, then, like you said, you have a new clarity of sorts. I can't say like any one thing pops, but everything pops. When I get back into it, when I got back to Michigan, I've been in Idaho the last 3 months. I just got back this weekend, and it's, there's a million things I have to do, but they don't feel like obligations. They don't feel like chores. It's like, yes, I'm back in this thing. I've been planning and writing these notes and making these plans and, checking trail cameras from afar, but now I can get into it, and I'm ready for 5 months of madness. Mm-hmm. And fully charged, rejuvenated. And that's a good thing for me, especially with a family. I've got 2 kids. And so balance has been something I've been trying to get better at over the last 2 years. I guess more than 2 years now. And finding not only a way to balance my family and work, but also balancing my passions a little bit, I think has just made me more sane, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it seems like a lot of that too. It's like you're doing things. Well, number one, trout fishing and things like trout fishing and family. Those are all amazing things and fun. But you're also making sure that your whitetail passion is still fun.
Yeah.
Like the bottom line, you want to be out there. You want to be enjoying it. You want to be having fun. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, it's like the analogy of like a one-sport athlete versus a multi-sport athlete. Back in the day, they said get involved in a bunch of different sports so you have a really good understanding of all of them. And I think that applies in the hunting world too. Like if you are, understanding the way that water is flowing over rocks in a trout stream, that applies to whitetail hunting. That applies to how you approach that bank to, cast in, applies to sneaking on a turkey and all that stuff. So,
sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yep.
It's definitely been a good thing for me.
I like it.
Well, awesome. Well, now that we've got your batteries just recharged and raring to go and be thinking all things whitetail, maybe if you can, let's kind of go not back in time, but maybe talk about how you've hunted whitetails traditionally throughout your life. I think a lot of Michigan hunting from what I hear from you and other people, that these things are next level deer. And then maybe hunting a home farm and kind of the more management perspective and getting history with deer, and then that journey into doing these things outside of that realm.
Yeah. I'll start with the beginning chapters of that story, and then you can kind of tell me where to go from there. But as you mentioned, I grew up hunting in Michigan. In the early years, that meant going up to our family deer camp with my grandpa and uncles and dad and family members for that. And that was like a very traditional northern Great Lakes kind of situation. So it's big woods, it's deep swamps, it's a bunch of guys in their red and black flannel jackets, a lot of just walking out in the middle of the woods, sitting down next to a tree and seeing what happens. And if you saw any kind of antler, it got shot. So that's what I grew up on, in low deer numbers. And the deer numbers just kept getting lower and lower and lower the older I got. So that by the time I was of age to actually hunt myself, we didn't see hardly any deer at all. I think there was like a 12-year spell where not a single deer was killed at our camp. So I grew up, I think I could count the number of bucks I saw my entire life hunting up there until I was like 16 or 18. I think I saw a total of 3 or 4 bucks over all those years. And I started going into our camp when I was 3. So it was slim odds.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I decided to learn how to bow hunt that I started actually getting into, situations where you were seeing deer, could learn how to actually do it. I remember for so many years, I would read hunting magazines and I'd watch TV and I'd be like, nothing works. How come I can't even see a deer? I can't kill any kind of deer. But it was because I was hunting in an area where there was 3 deer per square mile and no one paid attention to wind direction and blah, 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 blah. So there's all sorts of excuses. But as soon as I started hunting in southern Michigan where I lived, my parents had 3.5 acres where our house was. And my dad and I decided to learn how to bow hunt, and we would bow hunt on our 3.5 acres. And so that's kind of my next step was there. And that's when I started killing some deer. And after, I went off to college. And then after college, that's when I took the next step in my kind of journey, where now I'm an adult and I have my own time and my own plans. And now I'm going to go nuts into this whitetail thing, take it to the next level. So now I'm trying to figure out, man, I want to try to figure out how to kill a mature buck, or for me, it was a 3.5-year-old buck at that point. And then that's when I started hunting some properties that I'd gotten access to myself, and I got to spend year after year there and started figuring things out, started, having some success, a lot of growing pains to get to that point. But yeah, so that, 2009 is when I graduated from college. So since that point, and it's now 2021, so I don't know, 12 years or something like that, 13 years since I've been out of school. That's now this period of my life where I've been focused on what I know we eventually are going to get to, which is traveling to hunt, and then also hunting locally, getting to know deer, managing, I don't own anything, but managing something as much as I can. So I've had a lot of fun experiences with both of those things, and I've fallen in love with both. What I think's been the most important for me, going back to what we talked to a minute ago, is balance. I personally would not want to do just one or the other. If all I did was hunt the same farm and managed it, and that was all I ever did, I think I'd be missing out on something really significant. And if all I ever did was travel to hunt and just go from public random piece to random piece to random piece, that'd be a lot of fun, but I would totally feel like I was missing out on another really great piece. So I count myself really lucky that I'm able to do both. And I've absolutely grown as a deer hunter because of that.
Yeah, I believe it. And I think, I would think, and I'll ask you this question, but having the opportunity to do both things has maybe taught you things that you can apply, go in both directions. Big time. No doubt about it. Same thing like Eric was talking about, how trout fishing or turkey hunting can help you as a deer hunter. Same thing here. One of the easiest ways I've always told people to become a better deer hunter is to step outside of what you're doing. Change it up. So if you just manage one piece, start traveling somewhere else. If you've always traveled, try to find one piece and really get to know it and try to manage it a little bit. Do the opposite of what you've always done. And that's the silver bullet. People want to buy some grunt tube and that's going to be the silver bullet, or they want to say, oh, if I just have this, this perfect mock scrape strategy, I'm going to kill big deer every year. And there's no such thing as far as that kind of silver bullet solution that everyone wishes was true. The closest thing though to having something like that is this. It's rip off the Band-Aid of the average, everyday, usual plan you've been doing for years, go the other direction for a while, or at least add that to your repertoire, and it forces growth. It absolutely forces growth and learning.
I could not agree more with anything that you just said there. And I think the big thing too, a lot of people get in this, I like myself included, I was 100% in this, I guess, little trap, I guess, where you feel comfortable. You don't want to try new things because what you have in front of you works. You've got your spot. You almost look at it as setting the trap every year. And there's a lot of really fun things that go into that. But Mark, you even kind of mentioned when you first started getting into traveling to hunt and some of that stuff, there are growing pains with that. And I think part of it, and I'll let you kind of fill in here, but part of it is probably adjusting yourself mentally, because what you've come to know and love on your own, be it the back 40 or whatever, getting out and expanding your horizons, you're not going to have those same preconceived expectations. It can be anything. So how have you adjusted yourself mentally to kind of find success when you're doing some of these out of state DIY hunts?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I've had to cultivate is just an ability to be flexible and resilient. And that applies to so many things in life, right? Especially when you're traveling to hunt in new places and new situations, because the only thing that's guaranteed is that there will be change, there will be unexpected happenings, there will be adversity. That's guaranteed. Everything else, you can't put chips on anything except for that. And so early on, there was two things probably. Early on, I was a kid and I had been raised on watching such and such famous person on TV and such famous person on TV, and all they do is kill 170-inch bucks every hunt. This seems so easy, And so the first time I traveled out of state, I'm like, oh man, I'm going to be in Illinois. And at this point, I'd never shot anything, worth taking a second glance at. But I'm thinking, man, I think I'm going to hold out for 150 because this is Illinois and they're around every tree. And I very quickly realized that's not the truth. I very quickly realized that you have all sorts, while there may be more older bucks in some of these states, while some of these deer act differently in some states than they do in my home state of Michigan, there's constantly different challenges. There's so much to learn when you're stepping foot in a new place, whether that be just the deer behavior or how property, influences movement, or what happens in many cases, how other people influence all the above. And so it's like if there's that old arcade game where you're this little rocket ship, a little spaceship, and then there's like these different meteors that are coming at you, and the whole point of the game is dodge this one, then you got to predict where this is coming from. That's kind of what an out-of-state hunt is in many cases. You're just like taking on this challenge and trying to get around that, and then you see the next thing coming, and how am I going to do this? And then before you even get around that, there's this next thing. And so you need to, or at least I've had to learn to embrace that and recognize that that's actually the fun part.
Right.
If you want to pull the trigger on something, this might not be the way to do it. Maybe the way to just shoot a lot of things is to have one place and know it like the back of your hand and yada, yada, yada. What I found that's been really fulfilling has been that challenge of diving into the process new again and having to figure it out. It's a constant chess match. It's a constant puzzle that you need to start putting together. And what I need to remind myself of every year, whether it be on this is applicable to a traveling hunt and even local hunts, but I constantly have to remind myself it's the process. It's all about the process. That's the fun part. But it's easy to lose sight of that. Even to me, like who's preaching this right now, I will still find myself on November 7th after 10 really rough days thinking, this is a disaster. I'm never going to kill this buck, blah, 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 blah. And then I need to kind of smack myself upside the head and say, dude, the process. Look what you've been doing the last 10 days. Look at that thing that slipped you up. And this way you tried to figure it out. And you did that thing you've always said you wanted to do. And you figured out it almost came together. And look what you're going to learn from this. And how fun was that encounter? If you can just take your enjoyment and your satisfaction out of your process, everything else falls into place. And it's a whole lot more fun too. That has been the biggest mindset journey for me when it comes to traveling to hunt for the last 13 years, for sure. Yeah. And it makes it more fun. And I've filled a whole lot more tags because of it.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. Embracing that chaos, that can be the out of the state hunt. Like you said, that those X factors that are those variables that you don't have control of, or other people, or this, that, the other. Embracing that and making that part of it, and making those adjustments part of the fun is really going to change how you experience that hunt overall.
I always think about there's this mountain out in New Hampshire. It's called Mount Washington. And my wife and I hiked to the top of it on our honeymoon. And we climbed all the way to the top. And it was, 4,500 feet of elevation gain or something. It was just a ball buster. And we got to the top. We were worn the heck out. And we got there. Like, oh, man, this is awesome, though. And we worked our tails off to get there. And beautiful views. And then we looked over to the other side of the summit and realized there's a road that also leads to the top of the summit. And then there's all these yahoos that got off the bus and were enjoying the same summit. And I looked at them and I thought, we are experiencing something totally different right now. Those people and myself, even though we're in the same place, we both killed the buck or we both achieved our goal or whatever. But because I went through that 4,500 feet of elevation gain and the several nearly sprained ankles and the wife who wanted to kill me and all these other things made it so difficult to get to that summit was so much sweeter. And so I always try to keep that in mind with these hunts and these experiences and these challenges and try to remind myself that all these bumps in the road, that's what makes the ultimate destination. Whether it's this year or next year or 5 years from now, it makes it that much more memorable, that much more impactful, makes it all worth it.
That's a really cool story. I like that one.
Yeah.
It really boils down, like you said, that process and even getting back to hunting for myself, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast or probably just in conversations, but a lot of my, I've got some bucks that I've shot or whatever, but they're not my most meaningful ones because the process was different than some other ones. Like it's that process really is such a significant component to the overall experience.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's everything really. It gives you that context behind how you got there, and I think a lot of folks would agree with that. It's not always the biggest set of antlers on the wall. It's the one that has the biggest story to go behind it that you're most proud of. So
yep. When you've gone on these out of state hunts, in contrast to your home field, right, where you're like, oh man, I've got history with this deer, and I've got 3 years of pictures, and it's eluded me, and like that's like a different process, right? That would then going on that out of state hunt where you don't have that history, but you've got the mystery. So what do you like? Do you like that mystery? Do you like that unknown, or does that almost aggravate you when you're out there? Like, oh man, I wish I knew, or I wish I had pictures of the deer here. Or you're like, no, that's why I'm here. This is what I like about it.
It's the latter. I love that mystery. I love that challenge, and it's like you're looking at this blank table and you just build out all the pieces of the puzzle, and you know what it's supposed to look like, right? You've got the box top, and okay, this is what the puzzle's supposed to lead to, but how the hell do I get started? And then when you first find that corner piece, and then the first piece that goes with that, and then a little bit later the next one, and then they start coming together, that's one of the absolute coolest things. When you get out there and you scout in the spring maybe, and you say, okay, this is what I think's happening here. This kind of matches up what it looked like on the map. I could see this being pretty interesting. I like the potential here. Like, that's an exciting start. And then maybe you've got the chance to go back for a day or two in the summer, and you go out there for that first time and you glass a bean field that's adjacent to a little piece of timber that you've got permission on. And the first time you see that big buck pop out of there, like, yeah, I knew there had to be some good ones in here. Now I'm getting even more excited. Now there's still a lot of mystery, but you've got this little taste, this little tease of the potential. And then you run some cameras, and then you get out there, and your first day of the hunt is November 1st, and you're out there, and you put up a couple cameras on your way into the tree stand, and slowly the fog of war or whatever starts to clear. And I just love that whole, in writing, you're not supposed to repeat the same word over and over because it loses its power. And so I'm going to break my own rule by saying process 10,000 times today.
Yeah.
But that really is it. Like, as you go through this process, each step along the way, it's like building momentum, both like an excitement momentum and then momentum towards that goal. There's this snowball effect as you get deeper and deeper into every one of these hunts. And it's a little bit like with fly fishing, you get like a little dopamine push every time there's a fish that goes for your fly, or every time you take you try to set on one. In deer hunting, you don't have that ultimate push, more than maybe once a trip, right? But you get these little bursts every time you open a door and you say, oh, there we go. There's something I thought. Or this is the spot. Or this is what they're doing. Or here's why I think they're doing this. Or you finally come around the corner and you're like, here's the buck bedding area I've been struggling for 5 days to find. And every one of those little aha moments is just like, it's the best thing I could figure. I mean, I love that.
That's awesome.
And Mark,
I'm getting excited.
I know. That's kind of where I'm at too.
Mark, I gotta go. I'm gonna go blast a bean field. I apologize.
But I think the cool thing too, specifically, Mark, from your lens, is a lot of folks that if there's anyone listening that might be unfamiliar with the Wired Hun podcast, you've interviewed arguably the biggest library of whitetail hunters out there. I'm not aware of any other podcast that has that depth of resources. And you've chatted with all of these folks. So you kind of talked about the process and how you go about starting to find these puzzle pieces. What does it look like for you? We've had a lot of chats internally and with some other folks about how they puzzle piece things together on these DIY trips. But what does that look like for you? How do you start kind of putting the pieces together to formulate a game plan when you're on a limited time crunch?
Frankly, Mark, what's your process?
So I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of it, and then you guys feel free to tell me if you want me to drill into anything in more detail. But it begins with Escouting, right? This is pretty standard practice these days, but there's a lot you can learn by looking at these maps ahead of time. And my approach to out-of-state hunts is all about efficiency. because I never have like 2 weeks in one spot, and I'm not ever hunting with outfitters or places that are pre-set up or anything like that, right? I'm going to this thing on my own, trying to figure it out. So I need to be really efficient with my energy, with my time, and every choice I make has to be, as well thought through as possible. So it starts at home with that e-scouting, and basically what I'm trying to do there is get a best guess on the major pieces of the puzzle. So look at the maps and try to identify 2 to 4 important things. Number 1, where do I think the best food sources are? Number 2, where do I think the likely bedding is? Number 3, and now some of this will depend on time of year. If I'm going to be hunting and they're in the rut, I'm really looking at, okay, where are there cover or terrain related funnels? Like a couple key things like that. And then I'm going to just mark all of those locations that I think I know something about that spot. I think this is probably a spot where deer would bed. I think this is probably a bean field. I think this is probably a pretty sweet little funnel between 2 ridge lines, and the saddle should pull some deer through there. So I want to pick as many spots like that as possible so that when I do go there in person to scout, I don't need to walk every square inch. Instead, I can use my time more efficiently and hit the core spots that I have some degree of, knowledge about and ground truth it. So I'm going to go and check out that spot I thought was this thing. I'm going to go check out that other spot and confirm whether or not my hunch was true, whether or not my hunch was accurate. And if I do that, I'll have enough time to go and find these other things that I never discovered. But if you go in blind, it's just an overwhelming thing to do, especially if you've got a large property or, big pieces of public land you're trying to figure out. It's just impossible if you're going to walk willy-nilly all over the place and think you're just going to stumble on something. So it starts with e-scouting. In a perfect world, I don't always get this opportunity, but in a perfect world, I would have 2 preseason trips. I'd have one preseason trip around like shed hunting time, beginning of March. And at that point, you've got 2 things going for you. Number 1, you can see the landscape better than at any other time of the year, right? There's not new green up, and the snow's hopefully melted. So you can see all the sign from last year really well. You can see the terrain really well. You can see where there might have been beds. You can see trails. You can see old scrapes, et cetera, et cetera. You got the possibility of finding sheds, which is always a great little sign like, hey, all right, there's something here. So that's a really nice thing. So at that point in time, I'm doing that ground truthing. I'm checking the things that I thought looked great, checking them out, getting a lay of the land, and experiencing what it's going to feel like in the hunting season once the leaves come down and all that. So that's trip number 1. And, give me a weekend to do that. Give me a Saturday and Sunday morning. And that's usually enough to get the bare bones knocked out. I did this, for example, for a hunt I've got this year in Iowa. First year I'll be hunting Iowa in 5 or 6 years, hunting all new properties. I've got access to 3 different farms. And I don't know how many acres that is, but I took a Saturday and part of a Sunday, maybe it was Friday afternoon, Saturday, and a little bit of Sunday morning, and just, hit all these spots that I thought that I pre-looked at, covered as many miles as I could, and just wanted to get a really good mental map that could then overlay the aerial and topographic maps on my computer, because those 2 things are very different. The mental map of what you see on the ground versus what you see in the map. It's very helpful to go in there with both of those pieces of the pie. So that's trip number 1. Trip number 2 is something I alluded to earlier, which is if you can get there for a couple of days in the summer. I'd love to put up some cameras in the summer just so I can get an idea of what deer are there. I'd love to get a night or 2 driving around the back roads and glassing fields, try to see something. And then I'd also like to, if I didn't have time to do this on trip number 1, on trip number 2, which I'm planning on doing next weekend in this example, is pick out a handful of trees. I've moved away from hanging permanent sets. I used to go on an out-of-state hunt, and I would go in the summer and like hang 10 tree stands and have them up there and ready. Now I'm pretty much 100% mobile on these out-of-state hunts now. So what I'm doing next weekend is just going and in the spring I said, oh, I like this area. I like this area. I like this area. Now next week I'm going to go back to those areas and say, okay, I knew I'd like this spot. Let me pick the specific tree that I think is the best. And I'm going to mark it on my GPS and plug that in and say, all right, this is a tree. And maybe I'll climb up into it and trim a couple lanes or something if I need. And I don't need a ton of those. I just want a few starting points, because I know that once I'm into the hunt, stuff's going to change pretty rapidly. But I'd rather come into the ball game the first couple plays kind of planned out. Like Tom Izzo, my Michigan State Spartans, every single game, he maps out the first 15 plays of the game. Every game, he's got this plan. It gets people into a flow. It gets them into their game plan. It gets them moving. You just got to get moving. And once you get moving, then you can adjust and build momentum. And that's the same way I look at a hunt. So now I've done that trip. I return, in this case for Iowa, I'll be returning on November 1st, and I've got 7 days to hunt, and that's it. So I'm going to go into that, having studied the maps, having a mental map. I'm going to have some cameras that have been running since August, and I'm going to have maybe 5 or 6 trees that I marked on my map and said, like, hey, these are good to go. They're picked out, and if you have this wind direction, for November 1st, it's a pretty good starting point, etc. So I'm going to have a handful of those places so that when I get there on Halloween night, I'm going to look and check what my wind direction is, look at the conditions. I'm hopefully going to have a couple cell cameras running that I'm going to put out in August. And if those are, you never know with signal, but if I get a signal, if I'm getting pictures from those, that'll give me maybe a little bit of information. But I'm going to start with that kind of first couple scripted plays. From there, probably even as I go out that first morning, and if not the first morning, definitely midday that first day, I will probably hang a handful of more cameras. I'm not the type that, at least to this point, I don't like to go and like walk a property, every square inch of it in, the season. Some people, when they show up in a place, they're going to get there and they're just going to walk it all day one of the hunt. I'm hoping that in this case, with a trip or two ahead of time, that's unnecessary. I can figure it out in a more low impact way. Even when I've showed up to properties where I have not been able to do the preseason trips, I still would like to be a little bit more targeted with my scouting. So I'm going to get in and be somewhere that first morning that either I have a good idea about, like in this case, or if I have no information, then it's going to be an observation stand. So if I have to go on blind day one, I'm picking somewhere I can see. And that is then scouting. It's scouting with the possibility of hunt. Cloudy with a chance of showers is kind of the way I'm approaching the beginning of that hunt there. And it's then observe, adjust, observe, adjust, observe, adjust. There is no fixed plan after that first day. You're adjusting to the weather. You're adjusting to what you're seeing. And if you're not seeing what you want to see, move. I'm not wedded to anything. And that's the coolest thing about being mobile. And the biggest reason that I've stuck with it since I made that switch is that I found that when I had pre-hung stands, and there's still a couple properties that I hunt locally that I do have pre-hung stands, you're always tempted when you know they're there. It's like, wow, yeah, I could go hang up a new thing, but there's that spot that's just, it's 80 yards over there. It's already set. That'd be so nice. I'm tired. And the monkey brain, lazy part of you sometimes wins that fight, and you end up in the spot that's not quite right, but it was more convenient. And I've learned that I have to, as much as possible, force myself to not do the easy thing, but do the right thing. And if you force yourself in this way to be mobile and not have those pre-hung options, every day you're thinking, what's the perfect spot for me to be today? Because there's no other easy options. I've got to go find the exact right spot, and there's nothing holding me back. And yeah, there's work. But now I can be, some days I make a 5-yard adjustment and that's it. But you start to learn, especially in bow hunting, if you're trying to target, and I don't know, anything more than 2 years old, those little tiny details all make a big difference as a bow hunter. Mm-hmm. So I run a saddle and sticks, and I've worked hard to try to fine tune that process and get really comfortable with it so that a 5-yard adjustment doesn't feel like that big of a pain in the butt, because I'm confident now that I can do it pretty quick, pretty quiet, and I can be back up and hunting in relatively no time. And that has been a process over the last 13 years I've been doing it, and it pays dividends now. So at a high level, I guess, I don't know if that was a Cliff Notes version or if that was a long version, but that's what my process looks like generally.
Yeah.
As far as getting into the hunt. And can expand on anything else you want.
Yep.
I like. I mean, you're essentially denying yourself that easy button. Like,
yeah.
I can. It's like if I had Doritos in my house. If I cannot eat Doritos, but if I put them in my house,
you're gonna eat them.
I'm gonna dip into that bag.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that has been something that we've heard from a lot of folks, mobility. And I know it's obviously an incredibly popular topic right now with mobility, but framing it that way, from it forces you into those uncomfortable situations. I mean, let's face it, you're waking up 30 minutes earlier, you're putting extra gear on your back. It is logistically more challenging. But I do I agree 100% that being mobile will force you to be on the spot, not a spot.
Well, and even just like your willingness to pivot, your willingness to like you said, you're making those observations. Like if you have those, which I mean, don't get me wrong, I've hunted pre-hung stands before. I probably will again, right? Sure. So, but if you have those, I think your willingness to pivot or trust what you've seen, is like you're like, I mean, I saw this, but they'll probably come by over here.
Yep.
Yeah. It's easy trap to fall into.
It is. And so this podcast is coming out October 4th. We're less than a month away now at the time of this airing from, the first day of your Iowa hunt. So I know you said you've got about 7 days to hunt there. Let's keep rolling with that as an example. So, it's a rut trip. Deer can be active at all hours of the day. How are you? So obviously there's some like pre-scouting going on in the summer and the months leading up to your hunt. But when you get there, so like day one arrival, how are you going to start unpacking that? And are you going to just start diving in and hunting right away? Or is there some day of scouting or maybe first couple days, whatever that looks like for you? How are you then finally planning your strike when you do kind of start getting in the tree?
Yeah, so morning number one, I'm gonna pick one of those trees that I identified as an option back in August, and that'll be based on if I'm looking at it right now in my mind, there's 3 spots that I think are the best general zones right now, and next weekend I'm gonna pick a couple trees around them. So November 1st hits, and let's say it's nice and cold, and there's a good crisp northwest wind. Maybe there's a certain ridge back on the backside of one of these properties that kind of funnels down a really nasty big bedding area and then pinches down to this ridge line that connects right to the only big food source around for like thousands of acres. It's like big timber and then CRP all around it and this one cornfield at the bottom.
Yep.
So it is like a big, huge funnel. And this ridge line is right where that funnel comes down towards the bottom and the food's all down here.
Yep.
So
I don't think you're gonna need all 7 days.
Yeah. So like that spot screams out a great spot to be in the rut if you've got the right wind direction. So I could envision myself absolutely sneaking in there at 3:30 in the morning on November 1st, climbing up into that tree, getting settled in there, and just planning on hunkering it down and seeing what happens.
Yeah.
If it gets to be there's two things that'll happen. It'll get to be in the middle of that first day, and I'll be thinking to myself, okay, it's like decision time. Decision time number one is looking, okay, what did I see this morning? Does it warrant me staying here? Does it warrant me continuing as I am? Or do I need to, pivot? Or did I see something that means I'm close? I just need to make an adjustment. So at some point in the middle of the day, I'm going to make that adjustment or make that decision. It's going to be stay, it's going to be adjust to what I saw, or it's going to be pull the plug immediately and move to option B, which I planned for this other property. If it's a situation where I'm going to make some kind of significant move, I'm definitely going to be putting cameras along the way. I'll probably put a camera near the spot I was so that I can be watching my tail. So I left this spot for maybe it was dead, or maybe there were 6 other guys all around me. I'm like, ugh, not what I was expecting. I'll probably still hang a camera somewhere to be keeping tabs on that zone for me while I move on to the next spot. And as I move on to the next spot, I will try to, put out, I don't know how many cameras I'll end up using this time, but I would bet 3 to 6 cameras probably that I will be setting up as I move from place to place. I'm not going to make a special trip into a bedding area or down in some big draw to put a camera in there just to do that. I'm only going to be doing that as I'm moving from point A to point B or somewhere along the way. You can get away with that. I think during the rut, especially in places like Iowa, I'm not as concerned. Like I am a nut when it comes to pressuring deer in Michigan.
Yep.
I can be very different in Iowa or Nebraska or something like that.
Yep.
But I still would rather err on the side of thoughtful when you can. So if I can, if I'm passing through an area already, no matter what, and if there's a spot that will help me achieve the goal, which is figuring out what's here and what they're doing, I'm going to take advantage of that. So I'll put out a handful of cameras as I'm moving around. I move to that next spot, and now it's the same thing. It's okay, I'm going to hunt this spot. And ideally, early in a hunt like this, I'm going to lean towards spots where I have visibility. Not as a rule, 100%, but I would lean towards spots that give me the observation opportunities, because that's a big part of scouting at any kind of out-of-state hunt for me. If you can see something, you can learn something. If you can learn something, you can kill something. So in this case, I'm in learn mode. I'm in really heavy learn mode in those early days of the hunt. Even though, of course, I want to be somewhere I can kill, whether it's September 1st or November 1st, those first days are learn. So that's what I'm really going to be trying to do on hunt number 2. I make that adjustment. Now I want to learn. And do I learn enough to stick with this area and keep on like tightening the grip into this little zone? Or do I learn, nope, this isn't it. Jump to plan C and then repeat. And then as you do that, you can then cycle back through, check cameras after day 3 if you're still not where you want to be. But it's, it's very contingent on what you see, what you don't see. And sometimes if I've been in a situation where I've gotten to day 3 or 4 and still don't have what I want, still don't have, the kinds of sightings I was expecting, the kinds of deer numbers or quality of deer, age of deer, whatever. And, with a 7-day hunt, if you get to that middle of the road period and you've gone through plan A and B and C and you've been focusing on one spot that you loved and you're just not seeing it. And if I get to the middle of the road and we're still not, if you still don't have any of those puzzle pieces, then I will usually make like the hard pivot. And that's when, okay, now we're going an hour away to that other backup location. Or now we're going to go, 7 miles down the road to the plan D farm that you're kind of like, it doesn't look that great, but I probably won't need it. Well, at that point, I want to exhaust all options and fully see at least what the possibilities are in each location.
Yeah.
So probably the biggest thing that's really helpful that is a little bit above and beyond what I already described is really not being dependent on just an A option or even just a B option. I've had so many hunts where I've had to fall back to the C or the D or the E or the F option. So those are always stressful situations when your expectations aren't met, when you thought this place was going to be dynamite and instead it's a disaster. Like it's hard for that not to be stressful or disappointing. But if you have this whole Rolodex of other options, it's a whole lot less miserable when you can say, okay, you know what? That didn't work out. That's not the end of my trip. That's not the end of the world.
Yep.
Let's move on to this one.
Right.
And if that doesn't work, okay. I don't need to pull a plug and go home. I don't need to call my wife and cry. I don't need to think this thing's done. No, because I can go to the next one.
Yep.
And that is A, the path of success, and B, it's the path to maintaining some level of coherence and sanity throughout these kinds of trips, when it's easy to get all in a tizzy when you have months and months of money and time wrapped into this trip, especially if it's like your one vacation, you saved all your time for it. And then if it's not going the way you planned and dreamed about, and trust me, I know you guys are just like me on this, I'm sure, for days and days, you're laying in bed dreaming about it, right?
Yep.
And then when it doesn't pan out the way you dream of, that can be horrible. That can be a real downer. So if there's anything you can do to plan for those and have those contingencies, it's going to make it so much better. So if you can do the first thing, which is learn to love the process, and then B, plan out a damn good system for that process, for dealing with the bumps in the road along that process, that's how you set yourself up for success, I think.
Yep. Sometimes I find, like, there's no question it's aggravating. Like Eric, you and I both hunt a fair amount of public land around here, and there's definitely pressure, and there's been I know times for me where like I'm jumping from spot to spot to spot, and I hunt a lot of small stuff, so it's like there's not a lot of room for too many folks, so it's like, oh, bam, this is getting hit. Oh, man, this is getting hit every day. But then it forces you to find new spots, and I've found some of my best spots because somebody was in my plan A or my plan B.
Absolutely.
So, like you said, that's just kind of embracing that process, kind of rolling with the punches, and sometimes it guides you into really, really cool spots or experiences or places you never would have checked it out because it didn't look that good, and then you get there like, oh, snap, that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think, too, Mark, I just want to back up to one thing. When you talked about, those trail cameras that you're putting out, it sounded like you were checking those, so I'm assuming those are traditional trail cameras, not cell cams, or is there a little bit of a mixture going on there?
Yeah, as I've gotten more cell cameras just recently, you don't need to do that now.
Yeah.
But I only started using cell cameras in any kind of real over the last 2 years. Before that, I had them on like a local property, but wasn't bringing them for traveling hunts. So they make a world of difference if you have it. They're awesome, but they've got two big things. Number one, they're expensive if you're paying for the service plans, or at least, I don't know. I'm a cheap Midwestern kind of Polish guy, Dutch Polish guy who has a hard time paying $15 per camera per month. And then if you want to have like 3 or 4 of those, I'm like, holy, basically my car payment.
Yeah. Yep.
So I'm stingy on that. And then B, signal is still an issue in a lot of places. A lot of the spots I hunt, at least, are in the middle of nowhere, and you're down in a draw or beneath a ridge or something. So those things just can be a hang up. So I, for example, in this Iowa hunt, I'm going to depend on my old school cameras, and I'll have a couple cell cams as a hopefully maybe, but I'm not going to live and die with them because I know they can be still touch and go.
Yep.
If you're on the kind of like on the move on that hunt, and like you said, you're going into a spot and then maybe you're on your way out and you're like, oh, I'm going to set a camera here. Or like you said, I'm going to set a camera where I was because, you always want to capture, oh, I left at 11 and the big buck came by at noon. That's really cool. But how are you collecting those at the end of the hunt? Are you just like, man, it's the last day or it's the last morning? Are you going back and just, are you, I guess if you killed a deer, then you go back and get your stuff, right? But like, how are you managing, like, if you're hunting a lot of different spots, going back and getting your gear?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna try to be in a position where if I'm not finding what I want to find, I'm gonna rotate around, and either if these different spots that I've explored and haven't fallen in love with yet, if there's still like, hey, I still think there's a sense of possibility here, then leave the camera, and then I'm going to be working my way back through those.
Gotcha.
If I have to check, like if it's in a situation where I'm still scrambling and don't have an opportunity yet, I'll be going and moving around midday and checking spots out, doing kind of like a speed scouting type situation where I'd be scouting on the ground, and then also, okay, I'm going to learn what I can on my way to this camera location, pull this card. And that's something that I'll probably be doing between, 11 and 2 on a day. And ideally, if I got a day in the forecast that's really ideal for that type of thing, like if there's a really windy day or a rainy day, then if I see that, coming up tomorrow and I still don't have something to work with, I'm going to circle that and say, all right, here's my day to really pound the pavement and go back, check every camera, go back. And if I still don't like what I see, I'm going to take advantage of this weather to really pound the ground and do some more of this aggressive on the ground scouting, because you've got a little bit extra wiggle room in those conditions. So if you have to do that, you can. But I more times than not always, but more times than not, after a couple days of that, test and observe, I'm usually onto something where I don't need to keep going back. If you did your homework well enough ahead of time, and if you're in the right general kind of area, you can, I hopefully am by the middle of the trip, tightening in on the thing I want versus still circling wildly, trying to find something to work with it all.
Yeah. Sure. Okay, Mark, same question here. So we've kind of spilled the beans on the Iowa trip, obviously, that you got going on. Now, let's just say, for example, you didn't have 10 buck tags. You had 1 buck tag. You're in your home state of Michigan. You fill that tag in the last week of October. You had the first week of November off. You have it off. You're not able to get that time off work back. So now it's October 29th, and you're planning a trip to go to a new state, ground that you have not scouted before. So there's been no pre-scouting, nothing like that. Obviously, you can build in some e-scouting and whatnot. But what does that process look like now when you're going to a totally brand new spot at the drop of a hat, and what does your approach look like? So obviously you haven't had any boots on the ground here before. What are you doing now?
Yeah, so there's a lot of similarities with a few gaps built in that you try to fill in other creative ways. So step one is trying to find the general location you want to go to. So in a perfect world, I would have some place that I had always had circled in the map and said, I want to go there someday. Or maybe there was this place that your buddy hunted 6 years ago and was like, dude, it was awesome, but he hasn't been able to go back. And he said, hey, you should check it out next time you get a free. Hopefully there's something like that I can go on that lead. But if not, and if I'm really 100% cold, then I'm doing some e-scouting with some like e-research, which is, maybe mining the forums, maybe going back and looking at, some stuff like record book entries and deer density and harvest success rates and things like that, just to give me, if I didn't have any kind of like preconceived notions or other information, that can help you zero in on like, okay, this is a good corner of Indiana and this is a good corner of Indiana. And that's like a starting point. And once I have like those starting points, like for example, I did this, I don't know how many years ago, 7-8 years ago in Indiana. And I zeroed in on like, okay, here's a 2-county region that looks like it's uniquely good for this part of the state. And it's farther away from the major city centers. And there's a handful of public spots. And it's close enough that I could probably knock on some doors and maybe get permission too if I had to. So I find some stuff like that. And then I'm looking at my maps and I'm just starting to look for, depends on what you want to do. In this situation, if it's late October, it's hard to get permission at the last minute like that. So in that case, you're probably leaning towards public land. In that situation, if I can find something adjacent to public land that's really exceptional, that's a go-to. So I love finding a Boy Scout camp or a city park or a nature conservancy property that, isn't where hunting isn't allowed or anything like that, where, there's going to be a built-in sanctuary, or maybe it's 1,000 acres of cattail swamp on private land. And then there's this little piece of public next to it, whatever it might be. If there's some kind of feature, some type of regulation, something that's going to create this unique sanctuary for deer adjacent to public land, those are always the first kinds of spots that I'm going to zero in on. You can't always find that, but if you can, that's like a blinking light for me. Like, hey, this could be extra special. Another thing that I do that is maybe different than some people is you can actually go and find QDM co-op maps. You can, if you like do some Googling and find the names of local QDM co-ops, Quality Deer Management, or now National Deer Association. If you find some people that are managing for deer in the area, lots of times there's those kinds of places near public land. And no, this is like, I've got unique goals. My goals are I want to try to shoot a mature buck, even on these hunts. So if you don't care about that, then a lot of what I just said doesn't matter. But if you are trying to find a 3 or 4 year old buck on a quick public land hunt like this, finding these spots that are close to areas that have a chance to hold those deer really give you a nice head start. So let's say hypothetically that I just decided, okay, I know that this corner of Indiana has been disproportionately entering, bucks in the Pope and Young record books, despite the fact there's not a lot of people out there and it's far away from Indianapolis or whatever. And I found a couple pieces of public land, and they just so happen to be next to this little 15 property QDM co-op. If I find all those things lining up, I'm like, all right, this looks like something that could be really cool. Now I'm going to do my e-scouting. I'm actually going to study the maps of that property. And if it's the first week of November, again, I'm trying to identify those things I already told you about. Want to know where the major pieces of the wheel are. So I always look at kind of a buck's life as almost like folks are like a bicycle wheel. If you imagine there's the hub, which is like his home, his bedding, that's like the buck bedding. And then you've got out the exterior of that wheel, you've got various food sources. And then there's the spokes that lead out from that hub, which are all the different travel corridors he's taking to get to all the different places he might be feeding and or all the different doe bedding areas he might be checking for does during the rut. So I'm trying to identify those different pieces. Where could food be? Where could does be? Where might a buck be starting? If it's, late October, maybe I do care about buck beds more so. If it's first week of November, I'm more so just doe bedding and food and travel. Find those pinch points, find the saddles and the ridges, find the cover pinches, mark these different potential places. And then I'm going to go into it on day one, having done as much e-scouting as possible, having done that previous research. If there's anyone I know who has spent time in this area before, I'll be calling them or texting them and just saying, hey, I know you hunted this place 10 years ago. I'm checking it out. Is there anything you'd be willing to share? And sometimes not, sometimes they might. And, I'm not asking for, I don't even want specific spots. because what such and such person liked or hunted probably doesn't match up with what I'm looking for. But if I could learn ahead of time that, oh yeah, you can't tell it on the maps, but the whole west border is actually a racetrack and there's 10,000 people there every day. That'd be a good thing to know. All those can help, again, because you've got this short window. You have to be super efficient. So if I can get a little information ahead of time that can just help me be more effective with my time, I'll take it. But now I'm showing up day one, exact same plan as what I described to you for Iowa. I'm going to go in morning number one, except for I'll take one step back. I won't have any previous trees picked out. So morning number one in this kind of situation, it'll probably be heading in late in the morning and doing some scouting into a spot I think is worth hanging a tree.
Yeah.
So I'm walking in as I can see, carrying my bow at the ready in case I see something moving, and looking for a spot that's both worth scouting and worth observing from. And then knowing that I'm going to then begin the process from there. Scout as I go, hang cameras as I go, and bounce based on what I see or don't see.
I think that's a really good tip there is, even though you're just like, oh man, I just got here and I've spent the money on the travel and I've got this tag, to not just dive in the dark and be like, yeah, I've got this, I'll find a tree here because I think they're going to be here. Like, I think going in and the intel that you can get on that first trip in, whether it's sign, it's just, it's easier to read the landscape and read the sign when you can see it versus maybe a headlamp or, it feels like you're sacrificing like some time that you're like, oh, I could be hunting. Yep. But I think you're way better off doing what you're talking about there, Mark.
Yeah. And I have also one thing that has shifted for me as I've just become, with time and experience, I'm sure you guys have experienced this too, that you eventually get to a point where when you find a spot that's worth spending time. When these pieces align, like, oh yeah, this is worth sitting. This is worth spending time. This is worth, diving deeper into. If, 10 years ago, if I were to walk into a piece of public land or a new piece of private, whatever it is, and it was 4:00 in the afternoon on my first day, I'd feel like you got to get up in a tree. You got to be sitting for the last 3-4 hours. And no matter where I was, I would just park it. Even if I found something, it's not that great. There was one rub. Well, I got to hunt. I can't not be hunting. It's different for me now. If I don't find a spot that's absolutely like, yeah, you should be killing a deer here, or yeah, this is like the spot to learn. Like, this is a great spot to observe. If I don't find that, I'll just keep on going. Maybe when it gets to the last hour of daylight, I'll post up somewhere just higher so I can see. But I'm not going to commit to something unless I know it's right. So I did this exact scenario we're describing happened to me last year with Ohio. Because of various things in my schedule, I had an extra 5-day window where I couldn't use my Michigan tags because I had to save them for the back 40. And I thought, well, you can either sit around or just go and try to find some random public land in Ohio that you never hunted. And I thought, you know what? I've hunted in the southern part of the state. I've never hunted the northern part. I'm just going to go check out the northern part. And I hadn't done any planning at all. This is literally the day before. I'm like, hey, Kylie, that's my wife. I think I'm going to take off for 5 days and just see if I can figure something out on this public land up here. And so I just showed up cold. I'd spent that whole night studying maps, marked my locations. And then the next day showed up, blew out a tire, had to spend the first day or half day getting my tire replaced and repaired. But then from there, just scouted and worked my way into stuff. And if I remember that first day, I don't know, I put a whole hell of a lot of miles on and covered 3 totally different pieces of public land and never found anything worth spending time on. In a previous life, I would have been posted up in that first one. Now I could cross off, I went to the spots that should have been good and they weren't. There was 17 tree stands and 4 trail cameras and 0 buck sign that should have been there in late October. I'm not going to waste time anymore. I'm going to get back to the truck. I'm going to drive half hour down the road. I'm going to go to the next spot. And, I did that over the course of 5 days and bounced around to all these different places until on day 4, I finally found a spot. I was like, oh, this. It took me 4 days to find that spot. And it ended up being too late to kill a deer there. But I know that if I had more time or if I, came back, this was a spot that was worth really tightening in on and figuring it out. And I would have never found that spot if I had, committed to the first location that had seemed really good on the map. But when I got out there, it just didn't, the reality didn't match. So, sometimes the most important thing is just learning how to cross things off, covering that ground, saying, nope, cross it off. Now you're, that much closer to the spot that is good. You need to be willing though to learn that lesson and then make a determination that, nope, this isn't what I'm looking for. On to the next thing. That's a hard thing to do though. Sometimes when you feel like the only way to kill a deer is to be 20 feet up in a tree and sitting quietly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you make a couple really, really good points there. Number one, like, I think oftentimes, and I fall into this trap too of thinking like, oh, well, I'm not hunting till I'm in the tree, right? But, you're talking about going in with your bow at the ready, and I know I've had this happen to me a handful of times. You're either going into a stand or maybe you're making an adjustment or you're checking out something that you just haven't had a chance to look at before. And I've never closed it. Like, I've never killed one on the ground like that, but I've come pretty damn close.
Yeah.
And so I think, like, going in with that mindset, yeah, I'm still hunting, but I'm also scouting. I'm also looking, and maybe ultimately you will set up in that perfect spot that you find. But, and you're talking about with, a saddle type system now and being mobile like that, you may not even get in the tree. You may just find a spot and set up on the ground, and that's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happened to me in 2018. I was hunting a brand new property out in Nebraska and never set foot in there ever. Me and a buddy got access to it and just studied the maps. And we showed up on day one, scouted a place in the morning. It was not at all what we were expecting. It was not as good as we thought it was going to be. So then we, midday, we got back, looked at the maps again and said, okay, well, based on the fact that this is all overran with cows and there's way less deer sign and deer than we were expecting here, let's try to find this other area where there maybe won't be cows. And there's stuff on the map that looked like it's worth checking out, but it was going to be like, I don't know what it was, 2 or 3 mile walk or something from where we could park cars. And so the plan was I brought my saddle off, but I was going to scout my way in. And if I saw something worth hunting, I was going to hunt it. If not, I was just scouting. And on the way in, as I was slipping my way along this river bottom, I spotted a buck standing in the middle of the river and dropped down and was like, hey, that's actually a pretty nice buck. And I said, well, I think I might be able to put a stalk on this deer. So I tried to put a stalk on that deer, got down very close to him, and he actually started walking towards me as I was crawling through this patch of cedars. And he just started jogging before I could clear those cedar branches and got past me before I could ever get a shot. But what I saw him doing, this was like October 25th or 26th or something, I realized that this buck was essentially cruising at 3:30 or 4 in the afternoon down through this river bottom. And I said, okay, if a buck like him is cruising right now, there's probably going to be other bucks that are going to start doing that too. And what I saw him doing, and when I took a look at the map and my settings, I saw, wow, there's this ridge that I was standing on when I saw him that drops down to the river bottom and pinches right to the river. So the river's like this, and the ridge comes down here, and there was just a 40-yard strip of flat ground between the river and where that point came down. So any buck that wanted to cruise this river bottom, like that one did, would have to go through this little funnel. I said, well, what more do you need to see as far as a spot to watch? I bet you more bucks will do that. And I wasn't committed to hanging up in a tree. I didn't bring a big, heavy tree stand that I worked my tail off to get there. I was wearing my saddle, and I had some lightweight sticks. And I was like, I don't need to use these. And it wasn't that big of a pain in the butt to get in here. I'm just going to make a little cozy shelter here in the cedars on the ground. And lo and behold, big old 5-year-old buck showed up a couple hours later, cruising down that same thing. I snort wheezed him into 20 yards and killed him.
Unbelievable.
So it's kind of nice when it works out that way. But in a previous life, I absolutely would have, felt obligated to do what you're supposed to do. So I would have tried to force freestand, or I would have tried to force getting to the spot that I picked originally.
Yeah.
It all comes down to becoming, what we talked about at the very beginning, adaptable and flexible. And I can point to that so many times that.
Yeah. You read my mind, man. That is the exact hunt that I wanted to have you elaborate on, was that 2018 Nebraska hunt, after kind of posing that question, but we just got right into it, which is literally perfect.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So what do you got, Mark?
Well, I was going to say, and definitely let's get to where you were going, but we talked a little bit about mindset, and I think when you're maybe back home on your home farm, you have maybe an idea of what a mature buck is, or the type of buck that you want to shoot, or age class, whatever. Does that shift? Does that does that shift for you when you're on kind of like more of a run and gun out of state hunt?
100%. Yeah. My goals and expectations are on a very fluid scale that adjust based on where I am and what the situation is. So there's a couple properties that I've had access to hunt in Michigan for almost a decade now. And so on those spots where I've had some of these, multi-year hunts for deer, I've become really picky. And I know like I've kind of got a nice little unique little spot here I've been able to influence. And now I know like there's a good chance there should be a 4-year-old buck around every year that I know. And so I just don't need to shoot these other bucks that in the past, they're super nice bucks for Michigan. But I am willing to be picky, and I'm willing to know that I might not fill a tag here, but I know that eventually I'll be able to gag at one of these deer that I've gotten to know. And I really enjoy that whole thing too. That's a whole different kind of chess match that's difficult and challenging and fun in a totally different way. And so I don't need to force the issue. I don't need to kill something, except for like the one deer I'm really after. And I'm okay if that takes me 3 years, or I'm okay if I never kill that buck and I have to move on to the next one next year. Meanwhile, if I go to a different state like that Ohio hunt that I described, given the expectations, given the fact that I was just figuring it out the night before, I was going to shoot the first thing that looked like it wasn't suckling on its mom. I was, in that kind of case, I was like, this is a fun thing to try to figure out on the fly. It's a spot where there's quite a few hunters. It's not an amazing place. So you got to kind of get an idea of what's here, what's available, what's my situation, and then what will be enough of a challenge for it to jazz me up. Mm-hmm. For me, I'm always trying to challenge myself. So I'm not the type that's gonna have to kill something just to kill something. So if it's a hunt out of state and it's getting to the last day or two, I'm not the person that's gonna just shoot the first buck that I see at that point just because I want to fill a tag. I don't need to fill tags. It's more so like setting the appropriate goal and then understanding that on a public land random hunt in Indiana, that goal might be a 3-year-old buck. And it's whatever 3-year-old buck. It might be a 100-inch deer, or it might be a 150-inch deer, whatever. In a situation like when I'm going to Iowa, in a lot of cases, if I was going to go to Iowa, I would have particularly high expectations and goals because that's obviously a state that produces a lot of older, bigger deer. But I know that I have just 7 days and I can't go back because this is like part of like a show we're filming. And so it's now or never. And so in that situation, I'm going to set an appropriate goal for that. Know that I've got this short window and property has never hunted before, but pretty good stuff in the area. So I'm going to, hold out for a 4-year-old buck. I don't really care what the antlers are going to be on it, but probably a 4-year-old. But if a nice 3-year-old comes in and I'm really excited about it, I'm not going to be mad at myself for pulling the trigger on that either.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
What it comes down to is like, I want to have fun, and I want to, for me, fun equals like type 1 and type 2 fun. So type 1 fun is like, going to a basketball game and having a great time. That's like being in the tree and seeing cool stuff. It's like grunting a deer and he comes in and you get the show. It's, getting the rush of having a buck come in and getting to shoot. Like that's all type 1 fun. That's like the easy fun. That's the obvious fun. So part of my hope for a hunt is to enjoy some type 1 fun. But I also want type 2 fun. And type 2 fun is the fun that can be miserable leading up to it. It's the suffering through 6 days of hunting and not knowing if you were going to pull it off and struggling through adversity and the cold mornings, and it's tough and it's brutal, and at times like, gosh, why didn't I take up golf? But then when you get to the end of the hunt or you do kill that deer, you're like, heck yeah, it was worth all the effort. I worked so hard for this thing. I struggled through this challenge. I pushed through it. I figured it out. I put the puzzle together. I got through the swamp. Whatever it is, you did it. And those moments, those things, climbing to the top of Mount Washington, even though it was miserable at times during that, I will remember that a whole lot more than the people that drove the bus to the top. Same way, I'm going to remember and appreciate a deer that I had to struggle through a whole lot of stuff for a whole lot more than something that was served up to me on a platter in some outfitter's tree stand. So my goals for any kind of hunt are always revolved around like, what's the right balance between type 1 fun and type 2 fun? So I want to have some of that type 1 fun, hopefully, but I don't think I'd really like a hunt that was only tip one fun.
Sure.
I want to as well. So that's why I set some kind of stretch goal. I set stretch goals. I'm also willing to be flexible with it to have the right balance.
Yep.
I think that's how I think
that's
about
perfect.
it.
I think that's perfect. And honestly, I think that's the perfect wrap to this podcast, unless
is.
you have anything else, Eric.
The only question I had, this is my last question, and I know we are coming up on time. We got a little shot clock here that's glowing red at me right now.
It is, but I always have extra questions, so
Yeah, so my last question, Mark, is, you've chatted with more next level deer experts than anybody out there. So is there one piece of advice? I'm sure there's a lot of it. So sorting through this might be tough, but is there one specific piece of advice that you've had from somebody that's really stayed with you or kind of like shined out over the rest? And if so, what is that?
Yes, Mark, on the spot, distill down hundreds of podcasts into the single silver magic bullet.
Yep.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is the absolute most important, but two things that jump out to me. One would be from a specific person. The second would be a distillation of kind of what I've taken from everyone.
Perfect.
So number one would be from your local legend, Dan Infalt, when he told me, if you're trying to kill a big buck, you don't hunt deer. Older, mature bucks are different species. They're totally different species than deer. So if you have decided that you want to target mature bucks, you need to operate differently than if you're trying to kill a doe or a young deer. And for me, that was like a big paradigm shift as I made this move from like how I had hunted my whole life up until this adjustment I was trying to make early 20s. So that's something that coming from him and that really helped formulate things in my mind, and I think for a lot of people. The second thing is kind of a distillation of a lot of folks' approaches, and that is sweating the small stuff. So I spent a lot of time today talking about like loving the process and not getting too stuck on little bumps and roadblocks along the way. And so you might hear that and say, oh, you shouldn't sweat the small stuff. But actually, there's an alternate way to think about the small stuff, and that is like remembering that this type of deer hunting is a game of inches. It is a game of small tweaks, and this decision versus that decision. And the difference is just 10 yards or 5 minutes, or that one creak when you adjusted in the tree stand, or that one, I don't know. There's so many different little tiny things that have to go just right for you to be able to get a shot, especially with a bow, at a mature whitetail. In a DIY kind of situation, that every little tiny thing that I can prepare for ahead of time, every little extra annoying, inconvenient thing I have to do during a hunt, I try to remind myself to do, because all those 1% add up to 100 eventually. But you can't get there. There's not like big 20 and 50% chunks that you can just buy at Cabela's and it's going to help you kill a deer. No, you need to take each little piece of the Jenga puzzle and put it up there to get a tower. And I think that has been something that every year I need to keep on reminding myself of that. And every year I'm reminded of it by the different people I talk to, because when I look back at all the folks we've talked to, started doing the podcast, I think in 2013 or something like that. And like you said, talked to hundreds of people, and all these folks are the best. Like, they're all amazing deer hunters. They all do it in wildly different ways. You can take one of these guys and another one, and they'll look at each other and tell each other they're stupid. Like, oh, there's no way that works. You don't know what you're doing. That's stupid. I would never do it this way. But guess what? They both do it in their own way. There's so many different ways to skin the cat, but every one of them in their own way is paying attention to their details, the little things that matter in their system and in their process. They have chosen to pay attention and to value and to prioritize the little details and getting it just right, going the extra mile. And while they're all taking these wildly different routes on Google Maps, they're all getting to the same end destination. And they all happen to be in a car that is focused on those small little intricacies, those little priorities that you must place on getting those small things right. They're all doing it in their own way. And so I think that really has kind of hit home for me, and is something that it's not easy to do, at least for me. Maybe for some people that comes second nature and it's easy. For me, it's a constant battle. A lot of the stuff we talked about today for me, and I know that the shot clock's beeping. You're probably saying, wrap it up, Mark. You're going to play out the music here and shut me down. But a lot of the stuff I've talked about, I struggle with. Like being process oriented, not getting so results focused. I just told you, like, you got to enjoy the process. You got to have to blah, blah. That's hard as hell for me. I am very results oriented. I'm very, very goal oriented. It's very easy for me to slip into, it's not happening yet. You're not going to achieve this goal. Woe is you. It's very easy for me. I am not a detail oriented person in a lot of parts of my life. I'm very much like a big picture person. I'm horrible at math and numbers and engineering and details and that kind of way. So like all these things I've had to build in kind of systems or check marks or different ways that I can build scaffolding within my own mind and my own lifestyle to be able to do these things that are naturally kind of hard for me, but are so worth doing that extra work to get to. So I only bring that up by saying, if someone's listening to this and they hear this and they're like, gosh, these guys, they get it done every year and it sounds so easy, but wow, I've tried to do that and it is hard. Well, I'm just here to tell you that it is hard and it is hard for me. And I struggle with these things, and I can only tell you these things because of the fact that I've had to struggle with them every day, every hunting season, every year. I'm working my way through this, but I've been reminded time and time again, both through my own experiences and those hundreds of folks I've talked to, that it's worth that work. It's worth that struggle. Because you grow and you get better and you learn a lot and you have fun.
I love it, man. I love it. Spot on.
I think we'll cap on that, Eric.
Yep.
And not just because of time, because that was just really good.
Yep.
So, Mark, thank you so much for the time. It's always such a pleasure chatting deer with you. The passion is very evident all the time, and the information is great. So thank you again, and hopefully this helps guide somebody to their enjoying the process and hunting for that new opportunity, finding their new opportunity, getting outside their comfort zone, being okay with being outside of their comfort zone. It's part of the fun. It's part of the process. Again, these are things that I have to remind myself of as well.
Yep.
When we talk, like Mark, just like you're saying, you say these things, but you're also saying them to remind yourself.
Right.
So, but thanks everybody for listening. Have an awesome whitetail season. Good luck out there. Hopefully some of this information helps you tag that big buck, that buck of the lifetime, or just a buck or a doe. It doesn't matter, because as Mark said, go out there, have some type 1 and type 2 fun. Thanks everybody. Bye.
There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.